everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Our next guests are the stars and writer-director of the new film, Motherless Brooklyn. In it, Edward Norton writes, directs, and stars as Lionel, a 1950s Tourette gumshoe who finds himself investigating a powerful New York City public land developer played by a perfectly cast Alec Baldwin, and Gugu Mbatha-Raw's Laura Rose, an activist pushing back against Baldwin's big ideas. It's a movie that calls back to the great neo-noirs of the 60s while finding its own place, and it looks like nothing else in movie theaters right now or this year. Let's take a look at the beautiful Motherless Brooklyn.
Okay, listen.
From Motherless Brooklyn, please welcome Alec Baldwin, Gugu Mbatha-Raw, and writer, director, star, Edward Norton. You guys, thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on this beautiful film, on getting the chance to make a movie and put it in movie theaters like nothing else that's out right now. Let's start from the beginning. I know that this book came out in 1999. It took place in 1999. You read it, you loved it, but at a certain point you decided to set it in the 1950s and kind of tell the story of modern New York. How did that happen?
It's not as bold a departure as it sounds, just because Jonathan's really wonderful novel, it has a kind of a literary surrealism in it. The characters feel like they're in a pocket of Brooklyn that never left the 50s. So in a funny way, we felt it was almost more authentic to the tone of the book to make it a 50s noir detective kind of story. And the book is it's the greatest character, and you have this wonderful intimacy because you're inside his head and outside his strange condition. But so much so that it's sort of like a Catcher in the Rye. You're in love with the character. You don't really remember. You don't think about the plot so much. And we just, in talking with Jonathan, who grew up in Brooklyn and is a real lover of New York history too, we had this idea of using the character to open up into a bigger look at the dark things that happened in New York that shaped the city.
Forgive me for not having read Jonathan's book, the source material, but I'm curious if the book in any way set in 1999 was about gentrification, because in a lot of ways this feels like telling the beginnings of that story and what we're still living in New York City right now in terms of displacement.
The book, everything, Alec's character and Gugu's character and Willem Dafoe's, that's all completely different. It's as though the character went into a
completely different
world. New novel, yeah. But you know, I think a lot of the best of these types of films, like Chinatown or L.A. Confidential, they serve a great function, which is they peel back the corner on the American narrative, and they say, hey, underneath there's a dark narrative going on, and we better be careful that we don't ignore it and not understand what's actually going on. And I think sometimes, whether it's Chinatown looking at what's the deep crime in L.A., I think in New York there's this the character Alec plays, there's this incredible reality to New York, which is it was actually run by one person for nearly half a century, who was autocratic and racist and a real estate developer. And a lot of people don't know that history.
Is it Robert Moses? Yeah, and you play Moses Randolph, right? Who, in many ways, is obviously, yeah. I mean, why not be direct about it? Did you look at Robert Moses? Were there interviews or anything that you could look at, or was it just take the script and do my version of this character and try not to make it that? I mean, the name's already there, so why go even further?
I think that you look at it when you play any part and you say, how can I be right? The best movies, I think, or the smartest written movies there's an argument that everybody's right. And he's not just a bad guy, he's a guy that we have an opposing view. And Moses is someone who, there were things he did that had to be done, the way he did them, and how he did them, and who he chose to hurt and who he chose to advantage in the decisions he made was always controversial. He was a bully, he was a tough guy, he was a horrible guy in some ways. But he did things that were necessary for the city to grow. I have a podcast where I interviewed people who work at the Manhattan Institute and places like that, where they talk about 10 and 20-year plans for the city. Well, there's a lot of things they want to do in the city that they don't do because of costs now. There's renovations to the transit system and so forth. So there's a lot of things that to keep New York thriving and to keep New York a city where people who have less money, New York is a place where people who have less money live outside the heart of the city and commute in. So Washington, D.C. has a graduated subway fare because people who have more money live in the suburbs, so they pay more money to come into the heart of the city. Whereas in New York, everybody who's working class lives outside Manhattan, so they have to have a fixed fare. So there's all kinds of dynamics that are in place, and I'll finish this, but that where people, you got to get the workers into the city to go to work and do it in a kind of effective way. The last thing I'll say is that you look at this kind of character and you have to just commit. You know, you can't think about, oh, I don't want to do this scene or do this scene. We've both played. You never played any bad people in the movies, did you?
Not yet.
Yeah, she hasn't. How could she possibly be bad?
I mean, look at her.
But he and I have both played.
It's in her. I can see it. It's there.
Yeah, probably. But we both played the negative value, the hero value, the leading man value in films. And when you play that bad guy, you got to give it all you got so that it's more satisfying when he wins. That's the movie. You got to do your job.
Actually, I remember when we live almost in sight of each other.
I can see into his bedroom.
Yeah, it's problematic at times. It's nice when you want to get coffee, but I actually, when I sent Alec the script, I think you wrote me in the middle of reading it. He said, "I feel my inner Lee J. Cobb coming out," which is for those who love On the Waterfront and 12 Angry Men, and I was like, "Oh, that's it, we're done. He's got it." And I do think that. I think that what Alex said is very true. I think, you know, Darth Vader was Anakin Skywalker, right? He was a Jedi and a force for good and went a dark path. But characters who are dark but are compelling, not just evil, who have, I think, you know, that lethal charm and lethal intimidation. That's a really compelling. That's much more compelling than just a total brute.
I mean, I would argue that he's a more compelling villain, and people will roast me for this, I think, that he's a more compelling villain than Houston and Chinatown, because at the end of the day, Houston and Chinatown is simply a villain. He becomes, in some sense, one-dimensional by the last act of the movie, whereas with Moses, there is an argument that can be made about everything that he's trying to do. He believes very much in one aspect, which could make the city better for certain people, but will also make it worse for other people.
Who do you like better, me in our movie or John Huston in Chinatown? I'm trying to include her in this part of the conversation.
Yeah, what do you? You play an activist in the film who's working for. Excuse me, it's an urban planning committee. Could you?
No, it's
help me out there?
a citizens committee.
A citizens
And it's,
committee.
you know, it's for, against the racial discrimination in housing. And yeah, I mean, the character, I just, really fell in love with her because she's got such a sense of purpose, and she's really not your typical female woman in a movie from the 50s. You know, she's not the 50s housewife. She's not really the classic femme fatale, because she's has a positive force on Lionel's journey, and the fact that she's also a trained lawyer, and often underestimated. People assume she's a secretary, and is dealing with these sort of daily battles, like the Tom York song as well. So yeah, she's got a lot of layers to her, which I really appreciated.
And in some ways, she's interested in Lionel because he is kind of an underdog, and he's the only one who cares about this thing that she is wrapped up in, that has become her life's work.
Yeah, and she doesn't even know really who he is. Truthfully, at the beginning, she thinks he's posing as a journalist, and she thinks he's going to, advance her cause, shed some publicity on what she's working on. So, it's they're sort of both using each other initially, but then as sort of the relationship unfolds and as time goes on, she does empathize with him, I think. I think she's obviously dealt with a lot of racial discrimination in her life, and him with his Tourette syndrome. People often feel a bit alienated from him, and so they're both outsiders, and sort of they come together with that sort of shared underdog sense.
You haven't directed a movie since 2000 with Keeping the Faith, which was a modern-day set romantic comedy fairly lighthearted. What took so long, and what were the challenges between? Was this a lot more challenging than doing that one?
It was more challenging. The
My question, when I talk to you later, I'm like,
yeah. Oh, he.
19 years, hello.
Yeah. No, Alec on the set was frequently going to my wife and other people and saying, he's very good at this, and you can't hold him. It's got to happen sooner. You know,
His wife, he said to me, whatever you do, don't tell Shauna how good you think this is going. And then I walk up to his wife, and before I even open, I go to open, she goes, no, she said. This is it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, life comes in.
Do you like directing though? Like,
I do.
Do you
Yeah,
love
absolutely,
directing, or is it something that you feel like you have to do for the story?
I think, look, actors are very lucky because we get to gig. You know, as we get to be journeymen in other people's visions, and we get to service those visions and be a part of it, and move on. And directing, and certainly if you write and direct something, it's a much more consuming, project. And that I don't feel like doing that as a job per se. You know what I mean? I think you do that. For me, that's compelling when you feel very deeply about a piece of work, and I felt that way about this. I didn't intend it to be quite that long, but it took me a while to research and write it, and then I was doing some other things. I was making some, sometimes I was ready to do it, and then, someone sends you Birdman in the middle of the night, and you read it, and you go, oh, well, that's we're going to be delaying this other thing for a while because this is too good, So it's been happy delays, not frustrating delays. But I think, in a funny way though, I finished writing this in 2012, and in some ways, some of the issues that it grapples with did feel at times like, hey, maybe we're moving into this post-racial moment where where Obama's being inaugurated again, and maybe some of the issues that this is dealing with don't have as much teeth. And by the spring of 2017, even the head of Warner Brothers was calling me and saying like, we need to make this movie like this, and in a funny way, I found myself kind of I was like, it's funny the way things happen. Maybe you that thing of like, things happen when they're meant to. It sounds like a cliche, but at the same time, I think that there are things, there are questions about how much we're going to tolerate of certain abuses from the powerful. There are questions, I think, within it about, do we want to make heroes out of power? Are we going to confer a heroic value on power, or are we going to confer it on taking people who take care of each other, people who commit themselves to other people's well-being? What value do we really want to embrace and call heroic? And I think it's a pretty timely, it's pretty well-timed question.
Did you worry about it being timely at all when you were coming into making it? Did you want it to feel more timely? I think the movie feels timely without in any way preaching or sort of letting you know or being on the nose about exactly how it is of the moment. But is that something that when you're making a movie like this that's going to be released in thousands of theaters, are you thinking about, how clear you're going to be with this idea?
Yeah, not to sound like academic, but I've always thought that like Joseph Campbell, the great writer on dramas and myths and things. The thing he said that never left my head is that people can be entertained by something that's opaque. They can watch something passively, and you can be entertained by it. But the stuff that really sticks is transparent. You can see through it and see how it's really about you or about the time that you are living in. And if that transparency, if you cut through a thing and you can really feel, wow, this is about us. This is about me. This is about something, you connect in a very different way. So when things are timely, I think what you're really saying is, do they feel transparent to people? Can they see something about what they're going through in it? And I think it's really hard to do that when you're living in the middle of a history. No matter how much you think you know about what's going on, we haven't had the time to really assess it. And sometimes it's easier to look back at things we have more clarity about what happened, and understand and know more about what we ought to be considering now by looking backward, if that makes any sense.
Sort of what we are in the original sin in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think if people because a lot of times, I mean, people we
Sorry, guys, I'll
no
repeat this
if you come if you you know, like Alec and we've been in New York, you know, most of our adult lives, and you there's a story. You tell yourself a story about New York is the melting pot. It's the great egalitarian city. It's the city where democracy works, you know, for all its flaws. And when you find out that, in truth, a lot of what we're dealing with today that is really problematic, the lack of affordable housing, the projects, the worst slums in the world, you know, the lack of like trains, like that this all was a function of a single person's, you know, dark and very prejudiced vision. That's a real slap in the face of the narrative we tell ourselves about how New York got to be what it is and what it isn't. You know what I mean? And I think it's healthy to wake up to what happens while we're all on cruise control, you know?
Alec, kind of an obvious question. Was there any hesitancy on your part to play a powerful land developer who lived by his prejudices following a few years of playing a real estate developer who lives by his prejudices?
I want to say this, two things. One, to answer your question, is that, and very quickly, is that, and I don't say this just to malign someone, but a character that's essentially based on Robert Moses is a character based on a man who had tremendous consequences for New York. If you read Bob Caro's book, The Power Broker, a famous book, big, thick book about many incredible anecdotes about Moses' career. Robert Moses was a guy that changed the city. He was important. He left his fingerprints all over every part of the city, bridges, roads, so forth. He changed New York. Another person that people keep referring to, he was inconsequential in the life of New York, as I understand it. He was a guy that was there. Not even his brethren in the real estate industry had any relationship with him. He was a guy who sat up in his golden cage and ate Colonel Sanders' chicken and ran his empire, and he's not someone who the importance factor. And this is not to belie anybody.
Ran it into the ground.
Yeah, I mean, the one guy was like this much influence, and the other guy it's like this much influence in the life of New York. The second thing I want to say, at your expense, not really, is one of the exciting things for me in this business, because we've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this a little while, and is to see the people that you work with in a movie that you're in who are the next thing. This woman is going to be one of the biggest movie stars in this business. She has everything. She's a great actress. She's a gorgeous leading lady, all that stuff. Fellow SAG member.
Thank you.
I'm saying that as respectfully. But I'm saying that's such a great, exciting thing. I've seen all your movies. I've seen all your movies already. I've seen them twice, some of them. But I'm saying it's exciting to see somebody who this is really the beginning of a great film career for her. It's really exciting for her.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I remember seeing you. And
that was your job, by the way, to kiss her ass that way. I'm happy to,
have I not kissed enough ass on this stage, Alec? Have I not kissed
ball.
enough ass?
I'm happy to shoot the ball over here.
I remember seeing you, and you had to. I'll be transparent about this. Remind me of the title in the green room and Beyond the Lights, which was a wonderful film. And I remember that was, I think, the first time that I saw you in that movie, and thinking to myself, who is this person? This is an incredible performance, and it felt so effortless as well, and like a beautiful, effortless, nonchalance performance, but it clearly required a lot of work. And you've been in a number of movies since then, but in this film, I feel like you're working with Alec, you're working with Edward, you're working with Robert Wisdom, you've got Michael Kenneth Williams
all
in
the
this
boys,
as well.
yeah.
What is it like working with this cast?
It's been phenomenal, I have to say. I mean, for me, you know, being surrounded by actors that I've watched and seen their performances in so many incredible films, it's been really inspiring. And you know, being the sole Brit on the set, apart from Dick Pope, our amazing DP.
Oh, yeah, we'll get to him. I'm
who's
saving
done
time for
a
him.
phenomenal job too. But no, it's really inspiring. You know, I think it makes you better when you're surrounded by, you know, that level of experience and expertise. And it's been really fascinating also to watch the dynamic of Edward as a director and actor and writer, you know, and that balance really is really challenging, but also kind of keeps you on your toes, I think. And so I felt really stretched and really inspired to be in everyone's company.
By the way, the same. I mean, I feel the same. It's Gugu, I'd seen Gugu's work in Black Mirror and Beyond the Lights and Belle and a bunch of things, but I think that I like it when an audience's relationship with a character aligns with their relationship with the actor, if that makes sense. And to me, the fact, like, my character is watching her, wanting to know more, and that's exactly how I feel audiences feel about Gugu. It's like, wait, I know there's something about her. I want to know more. I want to know more. You know, so if the audience is pulling through the movie with the exact same desire to know more about someone who is unfamiliar to them, that's just perfect. You know what I mean? And
you feel that with great actors in the first performances that you see them in. I remember seeing you in Primal Fear when I was young and being like, "Who is this? This is amazing. Who is this person?"
Yeah,
you know?
and I think, by the way, I really do think that to me, casting is like, there's something about the essential core. I think that and you know, when I came up in New York, I saw Alec do Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway, and it had an enormous impact on me. I thought, because there was a role that was like, you know, owned, defined by another actor, and he completely took it back with the force of his own understanding of the language and all of it. And I think that to me, when I thought about almost every other part in this, I really said to myself, I am only going to cast this film with New York actors who have had a theater background, because there's a lot of language in it. And like there's a dark soliloquy at the end of this film that is like a defining scene in it. And I thought, if it wasn't someone like Alec, who has a command of language, like a Shakespearean actor's kind of ability to drive through language. Yeah, I'm not saying we would ever put you in Shakespeare. Exactly. That wouldn't work at all.
Then we cross a line.
That wouldn't work at all. But
I
think that you need people in this film who, like Willem Dafoe and Cherry Jones, Bobby Cannavale, who can take their bit of it and make language work, make language compelling, because those are those films we saw that we were like, wow, why are those people in those older films? Why do they seem so grown up? Some of it's because they're not afraid of language. You know what I mean? And I think for me, the only way I could direct and act in this is if I had people who had that kind of a background, who would come to it with very fully prepared performances, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, because you have to shoot fast as well, right? I will say really fast about that soliloquy at the end, and it's not really a question, but I love the way that you shot that in a very reserved way, and that there wasn't much movement, and you just basically were like, if we're gonna have this scene, let's restrict the drama of it and just sit him down and have him speak quietly. There was no big acting in that moment, and it was beautiful for that.
Well, I think there are certain things that the simple fact of hearing them said without apology is itself dramatic, if that makes any sense. Like when someone's relishing their power without apology, that is itself, I think, you know, a bit shocking.
Yeah. We have to get to audience questions in just a minute, but I do want to throw a shout out to Dick Pope, who shot the movie. He's one of my favorite cinematographers. He shot a lot of Mike Leigh's films, and those sort of shook me to my core when I was in college. What was it like working with him, and what made you want to work with the great Dick Pope?
Yeah, it was a pretty peak experience for me. I met Dick on The Illusionist, the film about the 19th century magician, and I was knocked out by his ability to, you know, he was nominated for an Oscar for that one, among others, and I couldn't get over.
Won yet? Did he win?
No,
He hasn't won?
And he's one of the greats, and he does period films in particular. I've always been stunned by how viscerally real. There's no sort of phony patina of sepia or fake photographic grain to kind of indicate that you're in another time. Somehow he's one of those photographers who, you know, he creates a hypnosis. I always think in films it's a very unconscious thing. Things start, and you get about a minute with an audience, and if the switch in their brain doesn't flick and go, this is right, I have gone through the portal and into another place, and there's nothing wrong with this.
Exactly. The easy way, and a lot of times it's done, it is effective, but the easy way to evoke that is to go black and white. And when you achieve the kind of elan that you want to achieve, or the vibe you want to achieve in a film, and stay in color, that's great cinematography. This is a color film that has the feel of a black and white film. It's so textured. I think he did a great job.
Yeah, and we have this I called it the Motherless Brixton because Dick's from Brixton, where Amy Winehouse was from, and South Side Londoner, and we have Gugu, and Tom York wrote the ballad for the song, and this great London composer Daniel Pemberton wrote this staggeringly beautiful jazz score that Wynton Marsalis played, and I felt like we had this cohort of British talent that sort of made our New York movie fly.
A little more British.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Time for some questions from the audience. Who's a question? Right. Hi.
My question is to all of you. What period of New York history is your favorite and why? And if you could choose to portray any famous historical character, which one would it be?
I mean, for me, researching this, because of all the jazz era and, getting into the Harlem Renaissance was really fascinating, a little earlier than our period. But for me, that, the root of jazz and the music and the architecture of that time was, is so inspiring to me. So I'd love to do something a little earlier on in Harlem.
I mean, New York is such a... There's kind of no part of New York history I wouldn't like to see. I think it'd be great to see the 20s when all these great skyscrapers, 20s and early 30s when these buildings were going up for the first time. But I think it'd be amazing. I think it'd be amazing to see it in the early days of the colony when the churches were the tallest things on this island, and there were dirt tracks leading up north of the village. I mean, that would be really something to see too. I loved that Terry Malick film, The New World, kind of depicting people coming into these bays for the first time.
Wasn't Gangs of New York kind of like that period of time where the tallest buildings was like a church and it was dirt roads and stuff? I mean, later than The New World for sure, but yeah. Alec?
I would probably say the war. World War II always seems to me like the last time the country really everybody was together, and I'm always trying to look toward that as when everybody in the country seemed to have a single purpose and everything seemed a little bit simpler than it is now. And so I think probably not just New York, but anywhere in U.S. history, but especially New York during World War II.
I don't know who I'd like to, but I'd like to use the downsizing technology and see Alec play Napoleon.
De-age to de-size? Yeah, is that, yeah.
Whatever Scorsese did on The Irishman, do at more of a budget.
They made them walk.
Yeah.
Did you see the joke that they said when they were talking? They said Pacino does a scene, and they look at Pacino. The guy, my former stunt double, Gary Tacon, who was a movement coach and taught them all how to walk younger. So Gary,
how'd that work?
So Gary literally walks up to Marty and goes, he still looks like he's 75 when he gets out of the chair. And Marty would be like, you gotta walk younger. You gotta get out of the chair younger. Get out of the chair, walk younger. So they would do a take. They'd be like, that's okay. We're down to 65. He needs to be 45. So they kept trying to get him to walk.
How does a 75-year-old man walk like he's 35 or 40?
He's getting paid a lot of money. He better figure it out.
Next question.
Hi, guys. My question for Edward. What is your favorite role in your career, and who would you like to act in the future?
What's the second part?
Who would you like to act in the future?
To me, choosing, that's like Sophie's choice. I feel like if I, say any one favorite, it would kill the others. I tend to sort of feel connected to the one I've done most recently.
Do you often find sometimes too that people expect it to be one of the iconic roles of some kind, but often it's like the job you have?
Yeah, I mean, but we can all speak to this, but great films are not always made by fun shoots, and fun shoots don't always turn into great films. So sometimes you have a great time. I mean, like you have a great experience, and you remember the great time you had. And then sometimes it's tough, but you really like what comes out of it. It's not always, you know, it's not always the same. I don't really have a role. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but I'd like to do something in another language. Like I feel like, you know, we have all these great actors, Javier Bardem and, you know, Jackie Chan. We have these people who come and they do films in English. I feel like we don't. Not
We're all gonna have to learn Chinese pretty soon.
I know.
Convinced.
Yeah.
We're not gonna have a career. We all have to learn Chinese.
Alec and I, as CIA officers who have been imprisoned in China for 25 years and speak fluent Mandarin together.
Fluent Mandarin. But well, it's funny. Like we won't name the name, but like it's funny how people in their career, what you think of their films versus what they think of their films. So there's a film he was in that I was watching that I really like, and I said to him, "Hey," I think I texted him like, "Hey, I'm watching so and so," and he was like, "Oh, that movie, what a pain in the ass," or whatever. And I'm like, "Hey, wait a minute, man, don't pee all over my fandom here. I love that movie." As it wasn't one of his favorites that he did, but I liked it. What I'm talking about.
I want to know.
Well, tell me afterwards. I'm curious now. Motherless Brooklyn premieres Friday, November 1st. It's a beautiful film. Congratulations. An incredible outing for you as a second-time writer, director. Wonderful performances all around, especially from the two of you. Friday, November 1st. Everybody give a huge round of applause for Edward, Alec, and Gugu. Let's hear it.
Thank you.
Thank you.